Church. We are pleased to have Tim Barnett speak with us this morning. Tim Barnett, excuse me, he is the co-author of the Deconstruction of Christianity. He's also a husband, a father. He speaks often for an organization called Stand to Reason, a good apologetics ministry where they have a lot of apologetics resources and how to share your faith, things like that. Greg Kokel, some of you might have heard of him. And he's also on social media. How many of you have seen Tim on social media? Okay, so a good number here. It's okay if you haven't. If you don't go on TikTok, that's okay. We will learn, not in this first session, but in the next session, a little bit more about what is on TikTok. Tim has some insight there. But he produces some good thinking to correct bad thinking. He has a channel called Red Pen Logic with Mr. B. It's on Instagram, TikTok, and he's viewed over by millions of people over each month. Really trying to get good content out there. On your schedule, it says that Tim is going to be speaking on what is deconstruction and the evangelical movement. We've moved that session to 10 o'clock, and we're going to start with the Q&A right away, okay? So that's in part because we need to get the laptop figured out and see if that connects. Well, there's some intention behind that. So I'm going to sit down, and we're going to jump right into questions with Tim. Now, just so you know, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. And what we're doing is we're kind of deconstructing doubts, you might say. There is a lot of questions that a lot of us have, or that our friends have. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we respond to these doubts? How do we answer them well in a loving way, but also with good logic? We talked last night about the importance of remembering that it's not just philosophy. There are these people that are behind all of these questions. But what is the good logic, the good reasons to respond? So I kept adding more and more questions as we got closer to the day, so I'm only going to ask half of my questions, which will just be 3 or 4. And then we'll open it up for audience questions, anything related to doubts that you or your friends might experience.
Cool.
Are you ready?
I guess. I mean, it's Saturday morning. I'm still not quite awake.
Yeah, well,
yeah. All right.
Maybe we'll get you some coffee.
Let's do it. Soon. And we were going to start with the presentation, but I would have probably had to hold the laptop in one hand, and you guys would have had to look off my screen. So hopefully we'll get things sorted out for the next session.
All right. So just jumping right in, a lot of this is just going to come out of my own experience, talking with people who struggle with faith, or my own experience. So I recently had a conversation with someone in my extended family. They found out, oh, you're volunteering at a church. They actually said to me, well, are you getting taken advantage of? Because they really questioned the value of the church. They said they recently used to give money to different Christian organizations, but they've stopped because of how bad the church is, the abuse, the scandals, and that's why they're no longer a Christian. How should I have responded in that situation?
You know what, in those kinds of challenges when they come up, we got a tactical move, and we call it moving towards the challenge. And so I would actually start by agreeing with them. There are lots of people who call themselves Christians, and they are just after people's money, okay? You can go on some, television stations and see it probably happening as we speak, right? Give me this much money and you will be blessed, this kind of thing. And so I would want to affirm some of what they're saying. Absolutely. There are charlatans out there. There are people who are out there just to take advantage. And by the way, that's not just the church. That's everywhere.
Right.
But I would say that's not the true church. Those aren't real Christians. Real Christians, a real church, when you volunteer, when you give money, the idea is to serve the community, or beyond, even globally, and I think that people can get hardened because of what they've seen. But what I would want to encourage them to do is, look, you don't know my church, you don't know what I'm doing. Hey, and this could be an opportunity. Why don't you come check it out for yourself? And then you can tell me if I'm being taken advantage of. And then you can tell me if my money, these are charlatans and they're just after my wallet or something. So first I'm going to move towards it. I'm going to agree with them. Hey, you've probably seen some stuff and I've seen it too. And yeah, so I I'm grateful for your concern, but I want you to know that I share that same concern. I've looked into the church I'm currently going to, and here's what they're doing with money. They're like feeding the poor with it. And when I volunteer, we're doing really good things, and I want you to see some of that. So hey, join me, you know? So I would turn it into an invitation to get that person to check it out for themselves.
Yeah, agree, but not wholly agree.
That's right. There's still, I mean, man, the church has done so much good, and for someone to paint the entire church with the same brush because they saw one rogue thing on, you know, some health and wealth prosperity guy on some late night TV show going off about, you know, well, you have to give me $1,000 so God will give you 10,000 or something. Yeah. That's not how it works. It's not like a transaction thing where I just put my money down and all of a sudden it multiplies in my wallet. No, that's not how the faith works.
Totally.
So I would go there and definitely try to work it into an opportunity, because we want people to see what's really going on and not just judge from the outside of what they think, but hey, come experience it for yourself.
That's good. So I have another friend. This one was over a period of time. He was attending our church, and then he started listening to a podcast, and the podcast seemed really sophisticated to him. It was like really giving him the truth about the Bible, he felt. Yeah. And so I wanted to check out the podcast for myself. I listened to a few episodes, and I was very skeptical about Scripture in many different ways. And so when I met with him to kind of be like, oh, I listened to it some more. What do you find valuable? You know, I'm trying to ask good questions. And he started listing off some of the things that he's starting to question about Christianity because of this podcast. For example, the genealogies of Jesus and Luke and Matthew disagree. The Bible wasn't actually agreed to be sacred scripture until many years, centuries after it was written. Further, you have various contradictions, and we don't even have the original manuscripts. He just started listing issue after issue with scripture. Yeah. And how should I have responded?
Well, I call that the machine gun approach, right? Where someone's just like, you know, they're just going to start spraying bullets. And the impulse, I think, that most of us have is, okay, I just got to start. First of all, that's overwhelming. I've been there. I've listened to those podcasts. I've watched those TikTokers, you know, been there, done that. And at the end of it, you literally have to take a deep breath because it's like, okay, where do I even begin, right? Where do I, and if you don't have a response, you can feel overwhelmed. Wow, didn't realize there was this contradiction, or this, I didn't realize that they didn't agree on the inspiration until later on, or whatever. Here's the thing, take a deep breath, and then I would start investigating some of these challenges for yourself. If they really bother you, and then we're talking about doubt here, and if those are causing seeds of doubt in your own heart, then my challenge to you would be, okay, take one of those. Maybe you write them all down, make a list. Okay, what's the most pressing one? What's the one that's like, wow, yeah, that one's got me thinking. Okay, let's go. And let's look into that. Yeah, Matthew and Luke have a different genealogy. What's going on there? It seems like Joseph had two different dads or something, right? Because if you start to look there, there's a name, there's Eli, and then there's I forget now. And it's like, what's going on there? And so we need to see, and I actually don't think there's a contradiction. I think we did a video on that, or maybe we didn't, where I think they're actually tracing Mary's lineage and Joseph's lineage, and that's what's really going on. But you wouldn't know that unless you did your homework, unless you did the heavy lifting, okay? Here's what you need to understand, though. Claims aren't arguments. Assertions aren't arguments. And what you'll find on a lot of these podcasts, a lot of these TikToks, Instagram videos, whatever, YouTubes, there's a lot of assertions going on. And when you start to think that an assertion is an argument, then you think, wow, there's all this evidence against the Bible in this case. But all they've done is assert a bunch of things. They haven't made an argument. There's a difference between the two things, a difference between a claim and an argument. An argument has evidence to back it up. So I can tell you that, what were one of the things that you just said?
The Bible not agreed to
Ye-
as Holy Scripture.
As
until
it
later.
wasn't agreed until, okay, that's an assertion. My question would be, how did you come to that conclusion? Why do you believe that? What are your reasons? And I'm just telling you, in a lot of the stuff that's out there, the reasons aren't there. They're not even offered. Now, sometimes it's just a short TikTok video or something, fair enough. But it's just assumed. I mean, I was watching Bill Maher. You guys remember Bill Maher? He's talking with Jack Reacher, Alan, whatever his name is, that big guy who plays Reacher in the new Amazon Prime series. I don't know if you guys were into that, like, action movie stuff. And so this Alan actor, Alan Richardson, I think his last name is, he professes to be a Christian. So he's there with Bill Maher on Bill Maher's thing, and Bill Maher says, oh, you're a Christian. And he's going to, now Bill Maher's going to, like, eat this guy's lunch, you know, he's just going to, like, let him have it. And he starts launching into the fact that, again, just asserting, as if it is obvious, and everybody knows, that the Gospels are just a copycat of other pagan deities, okay? So, December 25th, oh, that was like Osiris and Mithras, and just go down the list. All these other so-called gods were born on December 25th, too. And so the story of Jesus was copied. That is so baloney, okay? But he said it with such confidence that it was like, and the actor was like, he was like nodding along. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? You're going to let this go? You're going to let this like complete falsehood just like be out there for millions of people to watch? No, it's just not true. But he said it with confidence. Like everybody knows, all the scholars. Let me tell you something. There isn't a scholar on the face of the earth that thinks Jesus was born December 25th. Right? I know, shock. That's when we celebrate Christmas. But that's not his birthday. And by the way, there is no evidence whatsoever from history that Mithras or Osiris or anyone else was born on December 25th. It's just not there. This is was in a movie called Zeitgeist that went viral years ago, and it was animated, it was really popular, and there was a couple scholars that were just quoting each other, but never, I have atheist friends who think this is all baloney, okay? And it is baloney. And yet Bill Maher, he seems so confident, you know? So my challenge to you guys would be, when you hear those kind of things, write them down, and then go investigate. And what you're going to find is a lot of this is a lot of just smoke and mirrors, okay? There's not a lot of good evidence out there for a lot of the claims that pass on social media.
Well, and I find it interesting, too, how sometimes, even when there is true information, so Elon Musk recently tweeted out something with the comment, "History is complicated," and it was to a Wikipedia page for the Council of Nicaea. And so it was like, oh, look at this evidence for a church that gathered together. They had arguments. All these church leaders had arguments, and then they met together at a church council to agree upon something. Mm-hmm. Okay, that happened. Great, there's a church council. Does that refute Christianity? Like it's different, the argument versus the claim.
Yeah, so we got to learn as Christians to say, so? So what? So many times. I mean, I was writing, there's a video that's going to go out next week. There's a TikToker, very animated, and they're making the case that God is trans, okay? God is trans. And offers 6 arguments, and I just go boom, 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 walk through them. Half of them, though, like one of them was, well, ancient Israel had 8 genders. They recognized 8 genders. And I just my first response was, again, sometimes my wife knows this. I gotta keep the words from just coming out, you know? Because my response to something like that, my first response is so what? So what follows from that? Ancient Israel also, I don't know, worshipped a golden calf. You know what I'm saying? What follows from the argument that you just put forward? Even if I granted that it was true, which it's not, even if I granted that it was true, that ancient Israel recognized 8 genders. By the way, that would make ancient Israel more progressive than we are today, okay? Not more progressive than Facebook, which has 50 some odd genders, but more progressive than most of human history. And I mean, come on. This is like anachronistic, trying to read it back in. Really what was going on, and you can read in the Talmud, they recognized male and female, but they also recognized that there were disordered sex development. Disorders in sex development, DSD, and that is still recognized today. And so there are people who are born, unfortunately, with ambiguous reproductive systems, organs, okay? And that's a real thing. We call it intersex now. It used to be called hermaphrodites. But they were recognizing when a baby is born, sometimes that baby has a disorder. And that is not what modern day gender theorists are talking about when they're talking about trans and all the other stuff, okay? So they did recognize that there's 6, not 8, but still, so what? As Christians, when you hear a claim, you know they got together at this council, like they had to agree on something? Okay, so what follows from that, right? Does this undermine Christianity? Not even close. Like, you haven't even got there. Of course, a lot of people say that the Bible was decided. You know, they chose the Gospels at the Council of Nicaea. That was in Dan Brown's book that sold millions of copies. Talk about, like, misinformation going everywhere, you know? They did not even discuss the Gospels or the books of the Bible at the Council of Nicaea. That is mythology. Didn't happen. The Council of Nicaea was about the deity of Christ and how to understand Jesus, his identity. And there was a couple of people, Arius, this is the Arian controversy, and less than a handful of bishops who said Jesus was not God. And then the rest said, no, he is. And they all put out their case. They made their case. And Arius was condemned as a heretic because of his teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's you gotta go back to the claims. I remember meeting with this guy, and I was like, well, I remembered someone teaching me once, don't just remember 2 Timothy 3:16 when you're thinking about Scripture. Remember 2 Peter 3:16. And I literally pulled it up on my phone, and it's like, Peter here says that Paul wrote Scripture. Like, you can look it up for yourself in 2 Peter 3, where he talks about, you know, people get confused with Paul as they do with the other scriptures, using the word for sacred scripture. So as early as the writings of Scripture, they were referred to as scriptures.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we could go down and answer. I don't know if you want to answer all the
challenges.
challenges.
There's so many lists.
But there's certainly... I mean, even when you read that challenge, like, it was determined later on that this was inspired by God. When Moses, like, was on the mountain and they were like, you know what I'm saying? Like, he heard a voice giving the commandments. That was not like, they knew that was inspired, like, right there, not 100 years later. Right. In fact, the Israelites didn't even want to go up the mountain because they were terrified to hear God speak. Right? So this idea that this was developed later on, especially in the Old Testament, but even in the New, as early as Paul, as you just said, Peter was recognizing this is on par with the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to do 2 more questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor.
So get ready.
Give them what you got, whatever doubts, confusions, whatever it is. I think something that's tricky is, like, there's a study that was done called the Great Dechurching, and it's talked about how, you know, out of 40 million people who have left the church in the United States in the last 25 years, so like this massive movement, a bigger movement percentage-wise than any religious shift in all of American history. 75% of them made that transition out of church kind of unintentionally. They did the research on this, and a lot of people are leaving the church because they moved and they never got connected with a new church, and they're actually open if they were just invited to come back to church. And I think we're focusing more on this conference on that 25% who intentionally moved. As it was said last night, 1 in 10 have a frustration with the church because of abuse, a disappointment, and they leave because of those specific intentional reasons. But there are also these unintentional, just going through life and you leave the church. I have people in my family who it just feels like it's an apathy. It's not anger at the church. It's an apathy about Christ, an apathy about religion. What do you do in those kinds of situations?
Yeah, that is probably one of the tougher questions. Because, I mean, when you deal with atheism, you're just like, okay, let me give you reasons for God exists, because the atheist says there is no God. The apatheist says, I don't care if there's a God, right? And how do you get someone to care? I mean, this is like the million-dollar question, especially if you work in youth ministry, okay? And one of the responses I have to get people to care about God is to show that you care about them, right? When you start to show that you care about a person, they take an interest now in you and your life, and they see that God is the one who impacts your life, and so then kind of indirectly they begin to care about God. So that's kind of one approach. You can't just smack someone over the head and say, care about God, right? But I can care about you. I can show you through my word and deed that I love you and I care about you and I'm there for you. And they might start to wonder, well, why is this person so different than maybe others in my life? And that may lead them to start to care and investigate questions about God. Yeah. I mean, one of the other things we do, I said we don't beat people up, but actually I do. That needs clarification.
Yes.
So one of the things we do is I'll get invited to a youth event, and we might have done it here actually with the Discipleship Christian School, where I'll get invited in and I'll role play as an atheist. And oftentimes the kids don't know. If they don't know who I am, then I just get introduced. We're going to have an atheist come in. He's going to just share his point of view so that you guys can understand that there are other people out there who don't share your beliefs. And he's going to talk about why he went from being a Christian, growing up in the church, to leaving, just making a case, giving some arguments. And I give like a full PowerPoint presentation for 20 minutes. And I try to 8 arguments. Here's why I don't believe in God and Christianity. Boom, 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 boom. Can't trust the Bible. Problem of evil. We go through the Trinity and the Incarnation being totally logically incoherent. I mean, you believe 3 gods or 1 God? Come on. You believe 100% God, 100% man? That doesn't make any sense. Walking through all these things. You just believe because of where you were born. Just trot out the arguments. And by the end of it, I mean, the tension in the room, like the students in the front row won't even make eye contact with me. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not being a jerk about it. I'm trying to be friendly and joke and whatever, but it's tense. And then I say, okay, do you guys have any questions? Do you have any challenges? You know, it's your time to shine. And, some will, and God bless them, man, they try. They really do. And some you can tell, man, that must be a homeschooler or something. That kid, where has he got his master's from? This kind of thing. And then, we go back up, but most of the kids, I'll be honest with you, I get them to rate themselves out of 10. And it's usually less than 5, and realistically probably 2 or 3 is how they did. And then I say, okay, now that we've done all this, I reveal, I have these glasses. They're not even real. They're just glass inside them. They're my atheist glasses. By the way, this is funny because growing up, as my kids grew up, they knew that Daddy would role play an atheist, and he had his atheist glasses. He thought that anyone who had glasses was an atheist. So had to church. There's some church trauma right there. Yeah. So we got that sorted out. But I say, who's ready to learn? Who's ready to answer these challenges? And now I have a room full of students who now care. And the reason they care is because a few minutes ago, they had their faith really tested. Now, it was in the comfort of the 4 walls of the church, okay? That's the difference, because a lot of these kids, it's not a matter of if, it's when. And it comes for all, doubt comes for every single one of us. As an apologist, I have doubts. And I might have, actually, I think I have more doubt and deeper doubt than the average Christian, because I spend all of my time in this world where I'm constantly being challenged and hearing arguments that I didn't hear yesterday. Here's a brand new argument. What do I do with this? Did you know that ancient Israel had 6 genders? Did you read that New York Times op-ed about this thing? No, so most people hadn't. And I'm like, okay, what do I do with this? So it gets them, and so when they're out there in the world, they're on their phones. Most of them are on social media, and they're going to just come across. And I'm in the feed now, the algorithm, to see all the deconstructionists and all the progressives and all the you name it, because I red pen their stuff, so they just show it to me. But I guarantee you that because it's hashtag Bible, hashtag Christianity, hashtag deconstruction, hashtag evangelical, hashtag, those students are going to get targeted with those videos too. If you're a Christian student, you're going to come across these same players, and I'll show you some of them in my presentation. And they may find those people convincing, and they'll have no defense against it because they never got training. So, because doubt isn't the problem. Doubt can actually take you much deeper into your faith. That has been my own experience. It's doubt in the face of silence. Like, I have these doubts, but I'm not telling anybody, I'm not expressing them, I'm suppressing them. And that is a faith killer, okay? You just will not last. So,
even the example of Thomas, as we looked at last night, he expressed his doubts, right, to those around him.
Totally. The Bible, by the way, is full of doubters, and there's lots of examples of people in the Bible expressing those doubts. In fact, John the Baptist to Jesus, we could talk about that one too. I think that's our case study right there for how you respond to your doubts.
All right, last question. I sneaked in one more for myself.
Oh, you
Sorry,
did?
everybody.
Okay.
But this one, it's very vivid memory because it was a friend of mine that was going through a divorce while leaving the faith at the same time. And we won't talk about the divorce part, though that does seem to be a thing where there's an overlap between a moral decision and a faith decision.
Someone needs to do a whole study on just the divorce and loss of faith connection, because I have seen so many examples of that there's more going on. It's not just a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, anyways, he pressed me on this. He said, we go to church. You've been with me in church, and they talk about good Father. God's a good Father. God's this, God's that. If my dad never gave me a hug, if my dad never spoke a word to me, if he never showed up to my baseball game, never did what good dads do, never wrestled with me, never gave me, just a high five, I would say he's a bad dad. And basically his statement to me was like, God is absent in my life. I don't feel God. I don't experience God. And even he had experiences, and he's like, but that was probably just the psychology, the emotion of the event, the venue, the amped up camp culture, whatever. And so he was going through this deconstruction process, but it was like this real heart thing of God feels absent to me. Yeah. What do you say to someone like that?
Part of me resonates with the question, because there are times where God does feel absence. And I think that word is important, because I think our feelings can be unreliable guides, especially when it comes to truth, okay? So there are times where I don't feel God, in the same way like when you have a friendship with someone, you might not feel loved in that moment or something, like I feel absent, I feel abandoned, although they're right there, they're waiting, kind of on the other end of the phone or whatever. Yep. So the first part is the feeling aspect. Feelings are all over the place. And so we have to be aware of that and know that it's so interesting in this example you just gave. The person said, I had these experiences. Like, they were legitimate experiences. He said, I wish God would give me a hug. I had these experiences, but I'm going to write off the experience, right? Yeah. So, and that's what he had. It was just my psychology. It was just my mind playing tricks on me or something. So it's like you wanted the hug. Maybe you got the kind of spiritual hug over here, but now you're just saying I never got it. So what I would want to do is always inform my feelings with truth. And whether I feel God or not doesn't determine whether or not God exists or not. I think there are really good arguments philosophical kinds of arguments from things like the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the origin of life, the moral law that seems to be like a real thing, a real feature of the world, is that there is a moral law that needs a moral lawgiver, consciousness, religious experience, there's all kinds of arguments for God. And those arguments inform the truth about the matter, okay? They don't give me warm and fuzzies. When I look at like a philosophical argument like whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And then I deduce from that cause must be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, extremely powerful. Hey, that sounds like God. Now, did anyone get the warm and fuzzies from that? No. So I want to establish the truth. God exists. And then there's a sense in which when you begin to seek after the God that you believe in, God reveals himself more and more and more. Does God talk to me in an audible voice? No. But when I pick up his word, I hear his voice all over the place. Literally, he's there speaking. And that's speaking to my heart. And there are times when I do feel something, and it's like, yeah, I could write this off as, I don't know, maybe I'm just, or knowing all these other things, I can say, hey, in this moment, I am experiencing God. So I think that I understand the challenge, but to say, well, God's just this absentee father because he's not like the father that I have at home or something. I don't think it works. God isn't merely a father, by the way. He's the king and creator of the universe, right? That is one aspect. One of the titles we give to God is Father. But there's a whole other thing, too. And so when you put that all together, I think that this person has not undermined God because they think that they haven't felt God's warm hug or something. That doesn't refute God's existence. We got to start looking not at our feelings, but at the truth.
That's good. That's helpful. Okay, so if you have a question, come on down to the middle aisle and we'll grab you a microphone. So feel free to make your way down to the middle. Or am I giving the microphone? I'm giving the microphone, I think. Here you go, Bob.
You jumped up quick.
I've always wanted to do this. A guy walked away from church. This is the verse that really troubles him.
Okay.
Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But if they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is his property.
Yeah. That
killed him. I just want to know how you would respond to that.
Which is that Exodus 21?
Exodus 21:20.
Yeah. I actually think this is one of the tougher challenges that's out there. Old Testament stuff, we'll just say stuff, that is hard to deal with, especially in light of our current cultural context. By the way, I think apologetically, this is where a lot of the arguments are coming from. It's people who are opening up the Old Testament, many of whom have never read the Old Testament. If I was a betting man, I would wonder if your friend had ever read Exodus from cover to cover. Just that one book, not the Bible, just Exodus. But it's real easy to go to Google, slavery. Oh, there we go. There's all the passages, just pulled out of context. I think there's a number of things that God does in the Old Testament that are not ideal, okay? I think God accommodates with certain laws. Like, don't think of the Old Testament laws. Some people read them like this is the perfect law, like we should be following these laws in a perfect society, and that would somehow make everything better, okay? Now, I do think it would help in some cases, but there are other cases where God is working with very hard-hearted people.
Well, that's what Jesus said.
This is where I'm going. Yeah, I'm going there. I know I'm kind of leaving you hanging here because some of you are going to be like, this guy's a heretic. Hear me out, because this is Jesus speaking in Matthew 19. And in Matthew 19, he's asked about divorce and remarriage. And what Jesus says, because they say, look, Moses allowed us to write a certificate of divorce, and that's true. I don't know if it's Deuteronomy 24 or something like that. In the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, you'll see, yeah, Moses let them write a certificate. But you know what Jesus says about that? He says it was because of the hardness of your heart that Moses permitted a certificate of divorce. But from the beginning, it wasn't supposed to be that way, right? He says, and then he quotes not the Levitical law or the Mosaic law. What he does is goes right to the beginning of creation. God made them male and female. What God has joined together, let not man separate. So the ideal wasn't in Exodus. The ideal was in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. So that's the first part, is whenever you come across something strange in the Old Testament, get it out of your mind that this is this is the law that God perfectly wanted to reveal. In fact, by the way, all laws are restraining people from doing bad things, right? Like, thou shalt not murder is a good law, but it's like, why do we even need that law? You know what I'm saying? It's because people hate people and they end up hurting people, and sometimes they kill people. So you have these laws that are put in place to restrain evil. When you compare, by the way, the Mosaic law to the other ancient Near Eastern laws, I mean, there is no contest between which was a massive jump in moral goodness, okay? So there is laws about slavery because Israel had slaves. Everyone owned slaves. This was actually part of their system of society. You didn't go to if you need a loan, many of us have gone to the bank to get a loan, okay? If you own a house, you probably went to the bank to get a loan. You couldn't do that in the ancient Near Eastern culture, right? Your currency was what you could do. And so what you would do is sell yourself into slavery. You became a bond servant, and you would work for your meal. You would work for your money. You'd go to someone rich, and there wasn't a lot of rich people. And most people were poor. Most people were some kind of servant. By the way, it wasn't just like we think slavery in the South 200 years ago. Get that idea out of your mind. Because there were people who were doctors who were slaves, okay? There were people who were, we're talking lawyers who were slaves. There were people who served some purpose, but they had debt, and they had to pay that. So they worked in someone's house, and they were whatever job that person needed, and sometimes it was even some of the professions that we think, wow, those are the big money jobs, right? No. Mm-hmm. So there's that aspect too. So first thing but then getting to the specific passage itself. I think there's some hard stuff in there, and I still haven't in my mind kind of worked out all the details. There's some pretty good resources out there. There's a guy named Paul Copan, and he's a philosopher, and he has a book called Is God a Moral Monster? And he looks at all these Old Testament passages, and he's got 3 chapters on slavery, and he's got 3 chapters on the Canaanite so-called genocides. He's got, all this stuff, and so it's got a moral monster, and I think that the second part is, he wrote another book called Is God a Vindictive Bully? And so he's kind of got a series of books going there. What else do I want to say about that? So your slave so if something happens to your slave, I forget what you read there, if they're harmed, I think there's even a clause to set them free. The idea wasn't if you hurt them, if you killed a slave in the ancient Near East, that was no big deal. If you killed a slave in the Bible, you were killed. Okay, it was a capital offense. Yeah. Not only that, there's just so many when you start comparing the two, ancient Near East and then the Levitical law or the Mosaic law. You start to see, wow, God is putting these things in place to protect slaves, not the slave owner. By the way, you couldn't kidnap someone. Modern day slavery is typically I snatch you from here and I make you my slave. Kidnapping was a capital offense. Like, you couldn't be a kidnapper. So you start to see these kinds of things. And then, of course, you get to the New Covenant, the New Testament. And what do we see about slavery? There's neither slave nor free. All of a sudden, in a class system where it's like rich and poor, slave, free, Jew, Greek, male, female, even male and female in that society was not equal. We're all one in Christ. So there's like this ethic that goes to the next level. So you have like accommodation happening in the Mosaic Law, and it wasn't always good. Some stuff's bad stuff in there. Divorce, not great, but it was accommodation. Here's the way it's supposed to be. And we see that in the New Testament. Read Paul Copan. He's amazing on that.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on up.
So my questions relate to ministries. So sometimes ministries can get caught in doing something that they've always done in the past.
Yeah.
Sort of, this is how we've always done it.
Yeah.
So my question is, what are some positive ways you've seen churches make changes to their ministries to better facilitate dialogue about doubts and real struggles?
Yeah, good question. By the way, I'm so glad you asked this, because it bugs me when we do stuff in church we do it because we've always done it. Like we all need to be asking in our own ministries, why do we do this? You know, why are we doing it this way? Well, that's just how it was done. Yeah, but this is not efficient. This is not effective. It could be done better. And we need to, all of us need to be willing to say, yeah, maybe we should be changing the way we do things. So I'm right there with you. The second part was an example of, what was it again? Example of
how ministries could improve in this responding to doubt.
Yeah. One really cool idea, I'm just going to throw it out there. Most churches, their structure is the same. You show up, okay? Maybe you got coffee, maybe you don't, but you get your coffee. You go, you sit down, you listen to your 3 songs, or you sing your 3 songs. You have the announcements, right? Someone gets up, does the announcements. Then the pastor comes in and he maybe says, okay, greet everybody. Okay, now I'm going to preach 30 minutes. And then you got your pass the plate, offering, and then benediction. Everyone goes home. Notice there was no time in there for Q&A, right? The kind of, and again, this is not intentional. It's not nefarious, I don't think. It's just we don't kind of invite questions when we have a system like that. You come, you learn from me, I'm going to tell you, and then go. Just take it in and leave. I think, and I love that Tim Keller, you guys know who Tim Keller is? He did this for years in Manhattan, because he knew in Manhattan, man, there was a lot of people that were not Christians, but they'd come to his church to check it out, and they had tons of questions. So at the end of his service, he'd end, and then he'd stay at the front, and he would do 40 minutes of Q&A. It's wild. And people would come in, they'd ask questions about the sermon. Hey, pastor, you said this. What does that mean? Or they'd say questions like slavery, or questions about evil and suffering in the world, or whatever. And he ended up writing an entire book called Reasons for God, or Reason for God. Yeah, The Reason for God. And all those chapters are basically questions that he would get week after week after week for 30 years. And there were questions like, how can you say Jesus is the only way? And how could God love send people to hell? And what about the evil and suffering in the world? If God is all good and powerful, how could he allow that? And just go down the list. They're the classic questions that come up. So I would want to, if I was making a change and wanting to create an environment where people can ask their questions. In our book, by the way, we have a chapter called Questions. And it's advice, it's basically what I'm telling you now, advice on how to make your church a safe place for people to come and express their questions and doubts. And so make a time for Q&A. Be explicit about it. Hey, Friday night, we're doing a Q&A. Anyone can show up. And that shows we're not afraid of questions. We think we got truth on our side, so we're not going to back away. By the way, that's freaky for you pastors. Because now you're thinking, great, now I got to study or something, right? Or like, I got to do more work. I'm not saying you don't study. I'm saying like, now I got to do more work. But here's the thing. Maybe you make it easier on yourself. Say, look, I'm going to have a question box outside my office, and you can anonymously slip a question in there, and then you can go through, find one. Hey, this one might make sense in my sermon, with my sermon. I'm going to like answer this question while I'm preaching. Or I'm going to answer this question at the end of my sermon. Or maybe I'll answer it, I don't know, whenever. That could be and that way you can research the question and have your kind of notes and stuff for it. There you go.
We'll just keep it at these 3 more questions just because of time. But go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Longtime fan and follower.
Sweet.
Ever since you were on YouTube before then. So.
Yeah.
But my question is about engaging online. So sometimes
Yes.
you mentioned about machine gun
Yeah.
questions and all that. Sometimes, you know, when you're scrolling and you see like, that is false, that's not true, I could make a comment or something. But then you're like, but I'm going to get berated by these strangers or bots or whatever. Do I have the time for this? Do I have the emotional energy to deal with this? So more so I'm wondering, what's your formula for, okay, when do I just scroll and say, hey, this is like casting my pearls before swine. This is more of a, someone who's a scoffer, and really their heart is so hard that I won't be able to like engage them. Or where is it like, hey, I could say something quick here, and I'm going to leave it at that. So I just want to know, what's your formula? Because you're in this space all the time, and in the dumpster fire that is TikTok. So, anyways, I just want to know your formula.
Well put.
Honestly, cesspool. But anyways,
no,
let me know.
that is a great question, and I don't have it all figured out. I know that doing online apologetics is psychologically exhausting, okay? I have had to take months away from social media because of my own mental health. Like it is, so when everyone, you know, there's lots of people on social media and they wish they could hit a video, hit 1 million views. And my advice is no, you don't. Because half or more than half of those people that watch are gonna hate what you had to say. And they're gonna let you know. Not just in the comments, but they'll direct message you. I get direct messages every day from people who hate my guts, okay? New people, like I can block people, but there's like new people that just show up. So I used to interact in comments and stuff. Because I run all the platforms for Red Pen Logic and there's hundreds of thousands of people, I don't even really interact anymore unless I'm like making a joke or something. Because I would get lost in the back and forth. Because social media is weird. Conversations don't end, right? They like, you post something and then someone can post and then they're expecting you to respond, then you have to post and it's like a back and forth. And it's like hard to leave. In fact, I had to come up with a strategy to end a conversation because how do you? People think, oh, well, you posted, so then that must mean that you want me to post, you know, in response. So by the way, my tactic on that is just to say, look, I think I understand your view. I think I understand where you're coming from. You've kind of made your case. Now, and then use the magic words. Now let me think about it. You know, I'm going to give you the final word, even though I'm taking the final word when I'm posting. But I'm not adding anything. I'm just saying, I'll let you have that last, you know, word, that last shot. Okay, let me think about it. And then you think about it. By the way, in conversations, I do the same thing. And I do give the person the last word. I say, look, I think you've made your case. Is there anything else you want to add? I just want you to know that I'm going to give you the last word on this. By the way, that's a really gracious thing to do. You know, you got to bite your tongue, because if they add something like, you know, by the way, you're a homophobic bigot, and you're like, okay, I said I'd give you the last word, bye, you know, or something, then you just got to let it lie. And you got to get used to people, if you're on social media, you got to get a thicker skin. And we're Canadians, most of us. And I think there's something about us that likes to be liked. I mean, my American friends, they like to be hated, you know? No, I'm just joking. I'm joking. I am like in the US like more than Canada these days. So just like, and I got a lot of friends there. But I don't know, there's something different. I don't like the fact that people don't like me. And it bugs me. And it's something I've had to kind of learn to just live with, because you post a video and yeah, when you say the stuff I say, you don't get liked. So that's part of it. I would also, so don't even get involved on social media unless you know when I post this, it's going to cause trouble. I tell my wife, do not. The rule in our house is she's not allowed to post on anything on Red Pen Logic. Nothing. I do not want her to be interacting in the comment section of Red Pen Logic. It is like deadly. And if they knew that, she was my wife, it would just be trouble. So, and I tell my mom the same thing. And she always shares my stuff. And I'm like, Mom, cut it out. Don't share my stuff. Because I don't, and then I feel like I gotta defend my mom. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like I gotta defend my wife. Like that's a, I don't know if it's a man thing or what, but it's instinct. So I got my own stuff to worry about. I can't be worried about you guys on here too. So, so yeah, I would just know what you're getting yourself into, and know. Here's the other thing. One last thing. I would comment on something, knowing there's mockers out there. Don't mess with mockers. Okay, I'm just saying. Don't. That's pearls before swine. There's seekers and there's mockers. The Bible talks about them. Okay, it's hard to identify which is which sometimes, but don't mess with mockers. But if you do have to say something, just know that it might help someone else who's going to read that comment. So half the time when I used to be in the comments, I wasn't doing it for this person. In fact, every Red Pen Logic video that I've ever done was not for that person. It was not to respond so that that person, I don't even tag the people because I don't want them getting all kinds of hate, right? All I want to do is say, look, they have this idea. I'm going to attack this idea. I don't care who says it. And people can listen to the two ideas and decide for themselves. And it tries to take the personal aspect out of it. And I know people will watch that and hopefully learn something. So maybe they'll read your comment and learn something too. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, when the Ten Commandments were first written, they were labeled as the 10 words. I've done a little bit of research.
Yeah.
And then, it went through translation and eventually got to the King James Bible.
Sure.
And it said that's when the 10 Commandments was first labeled as the 10 Commandments.
Sure.
Before it was the 10 words. First, is it true? And if it's true, why would we agree or go with that idea?
That's a good question, and I'd have to do some more research too. You may have done more than me. I know it is the 10 words. We call it the 10 Commandments. I actually think that Moses didn't just come down with the 10 Commandments. He came down with like 600 commandments, right? It's just we know because of those first ones that, okay, these are the 10. And they do actually summarize. The first 5 are about our position towards God, the second position towards each other. And so there's something there but all of God's commands need to be followed. That's what the law was. You follow all of them, not just the big 10, not just the big guys, right? And this was the burden. This is why Jesus says the truth will set you free, because he's the truth. And their burden was the law, and I can actually set you free from the law because I'm going to fulfill it. You don't have to. So I don't know if we should really fight over whether it should be called the 10 words or the 10 commandments. I think what Christians need to understand is there was a whole lot more than 10. There was some, and this is why it was hard for the Jews. This burden was, because they had to, when you start to look at all 613 or whatever it is of these laws, no human being could, it was this burden that was crushing. And I think when you understand that, Jesus coming and fulfilling it on our behalf becomes even more of this gracious act that begins to really make sense. But you don't understand that unless you understand that there's a whole law, not just 10, behind all this thing. So, anyways, we could talk more later about that, because you might be able to give me an education on some of this stuff. Cool. Thank you. Cool.
I'm also subscribed to your YouTube channel, by the way.
Sweet. And if you haven't subscribed, you know where the door is, okay? No, I'm just joking.
So I wanted to say, I once heard a great argument for the reason we have the canon of Scripture the way it is because Jesus approved of Israel's canonization of the Old Testament, and then he gave authority to the apostles to write the New Testament.
Yeah.
So that being said, how do we go about the decision-making process of why some of the other things may have not been included, like, for example, the Gospel of Thomas or Philip?
Yeah.
Is it because they're fake or they have heresies in them? And if so, why did they have the authority to not include those, even though they would have been apostles as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. That's a really good question. So a question is about books of the Bible. It's a really good point. I remember learning this idea that, okay, we got the Old Testament. God and Jesus talks about he affirms the Old Testament. The law and the prophets, it's all there, okay? From Genesis to Revelation, or Genesis to Malachi, that's our Old Testament. Theirs was set up a little differently. It was 24 books because they were joined together. Not 1st and 2nd Chronicles, just Chronicles, this kind of thing. Ours is 39. And then Jesus says, look, I'm going to go, but the Helper's coming, and he's going to bring to remembrance all I've commanded. So the Old Covenant had writings. We call it the Old Testament. The New Covenant in Jesus' blood has writings as well. Now, they weren't there yet when Jesus was on the scene. They were written after Jesus had died. But the idea is Jesus was commissioning the apostles just like the prophets were commissioned to write the Old Testament. So you got the New Testament. The question is, how do you get these books? In 1 minute. The reason they selected these books, and most of them actually in the New Testament, were there was agreement right at the get-go because of the apostleship that was associated with them. It's really the books that it was hard to know, were these written by apostles? Those are the ones that there was some debate over, like the book of Hebrews, okay? The book of Hebrews, to this day, it is debated who wrote the book of Hebrews, okay? There's different ideas out there. Luke, was it Paul? Who wrote this thing? So you have, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there was no question. You look throughout history, doesn't matter what geographic point you were at, everyone agreed, 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, there are some other Gospels out there, like the Gospel of Thomas. But when you read the Gospel of Thomas, if you ever read the Gospel of Thomas, what you find is it's like sayings. It's almost like Proverbs. Like there's all these sayings of Jesus, apparently. The problem is it's written, we think, I think that one's 2nd century. Maybe 3rd, but maybe 2nd century. And so most people recognize it has Thomas's name on it, but it's not Thomas. The reason they put Thomas's name on it is because that's how you make your gospel popular, by putting someone's name on it. By the way, this is why we think like Mark and Luke are legitimate gospels too. I mean, just to add to the case. Because why would you put Mark and Luke's name on a gospel, right? Why would people associate a gospel with Mark? Who is Mark? Who's Luke? You put like one of the disciples' names, like Matthew and John. That makes more sense. And so there's reasons. You look at the content. Well, who wrote it? Was an apostle. If it's not an apostle, it's not even in question. We're not dealing with it. They're going to look at the content too. There's some really strange content in the Gospel of Thomas. It does not line up with the rest of the Gospels. It ends by saying that all women must become as males. That's weird, right? When you read the Gospel of Peter, it's like the resurrection is like the cross comes out of the tomb, this giant cross, and it speaks. Like these are like legendary kind of embellishments that get put on there and do not line up with kind of like the core Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which seem to be tame in comparison to some of these other things. So you want it early, obviously, and apostleship. Those are going to be 2 things. A lot of these gospels we know are just later, not apostleship. There's no apostolicity. And then you look at legendary stuff. And then there's, I'm trying to think.
Dating.
The dating, eyewitness, obviously that's, again, being an apostle. So within the apostle idea, you have the idea that you're an eyewitness. You're also early, obviously, to the source. You were there. And then they, of course, take into account some other stuff.
Yeah, the content. And you're not just making that up. Some of the early church fathers, they argued from
this was
kind of stuff. You just can't give us a whole textbook.
Sure.
Right now.
You read
Sorry.
the debates that were going on. It's fascinating. Like, here are the reasons why we don't think Thomas is, because they knew about Thomas, and they knew about some of these other gospels. So, I'm trying to think of a resource off the top of my head. Maybe talk to me after, and I could give you something to read on that too.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for your questions, and thank you, Tim.
My pleasure.